Let 'Em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode 21. In this episode, I talked to Ann Hansen of Inner Parent Coaching. Ann is a former public school educator and a developmental specialist who co-runs an alternative therapeutic program on a 33-acre farm in Oregon. She describes the farm as a self-directed space where kids come to work with animals and figure out how to express themselves. I invited Ann on to share her work, but to also share her journey from public school to alternative education and to discuss attachment theory, how attachment impacts our children, and what attachment parenting looks like through the teen years. As a mother to 2 grown unschoolers, Ann is reflective, she offers practical advice, and brings a calm to the conversation that I truly appreciate, and I think you will too. Here is my conversation with Ann Hansen.
All right. Well, hello, Missy. My name is Ann Hansen, and I am the mom of 2 grown unschoolers. They are 19 and 20 right now. I'll tell a little bit about my background and how I got to unschooling because it was certainly not on my radar when I first had kids. I'm a developmental specialist, and I currently run a farm-based wellness program. That's my in-person practice. And we have a 33-acre farm where we see, really our goal is to support the emotional health of children and families. So we see children, teens, and adults, and we incorporate partnering with animals. We really consider ourselves more of an alternative therapeutic program. So we have horses and rabbits and goats and therapy cats, and the kids have an opportunity to really self-direct when they're there and manage their own time, and they can spend time with the animals. Or we also have a renovated studio where we have art materials and we do some movement and somatic work. So it's really an opportunity for kids to figure out how to express themselves, have their own needs met, and really learn the relationship when they're at the farm. We also do some parent coaching there as well.
That's amazing, Ann. I have to, if it's okay if I can stop you for a second, just to elaborate a little bit more on your farm space. So is this something that you put out to the world and people find you maybe kind of randomly or word of mouth, or do you work directly with organizations that people can connect with you?
So so this is part of my homeschooling journey. It's a friend of mine who we met through the sort of homeschool, unschool community. And she actually is a counselor and works with animals, and she's an certified equine specialist. Okay. And when we met, when she heard me talking about the way I work with children and how I see relationship as key and connection as key to everything, she kept saying, "Oh, we need to do something together. We need to like get this together because there's something really special here." So we have formed a really special relationship over the year, and we started working out of her property. She had a couple of acres and some horses, and just doing some after school programs. That has grown in the past, I think 3 years ago, we were able to get a 33-acre farm. And that's when we were really able to develop the program more formally. So we're available for local people. I'm in Oregon. And we actually opened, which is kind of funny how this happened. We had finished renovation in February of 2020, and we had opened for 2 weeks when the lockdown happened. Gosh. So we had just started. I mean, it was talk about hard blows and how we need to dance with life sometimes and just flow with it. So we had these after school programs going. We had to shut down. We kind of regrouped and we decided in June of that year to reopen again and just see individual clients. And it ended up being so needed in the community and such a beautiful practice that we have continued on just seeing individual kids right now. So that's what we do at the farm. And we, like I said, we do a lot of energetic groundwork. So working on um, nonverbal communication, empowerment, leadership, um, leadership skills with the kids. And then in our studio, we do a lot of sand tray processing and processing with art materials.
Okay. And what age group are you working with, or this?
We are primarily 7 to about 16-year-olds is what we work with mostly.
Okay. That's amazing. That sounds, I was like, as soon as you said Oregon, I was like, darn it. Let me
Yeah,
go
yeah,
search.
it's a special program, and for my friend and I, we've put so much heart into it, and we're really careful with how we grow because we really want people there who want to be there, who understand the importance of relationship and growth. And so it's like our baby that we are continuing to nurture and let it
I
grow.
love that. It's like our relationships, right? Trying to be an
Hmm.
intentional and aware, and I like the whole idea of putting that same sort of philosophy onto a business model so that you're not overextending yourself and taking the time so that you can really build those connections with kids. And I think that's so key in really being able to impact them.
Yeah, like we're really careful with our own boundaries with not taking on too much because then we're not in the space to really be able to support other people. So yeah, it's a major part of the program.
Hmm. So, as a developmental specialist, does that mean that you have like a degree in psychology, or is it in
Mhm.
what does that mean exactly?
Yeah. So I have actually my master's in special education,
Okay.
and I started out working. I don't know if you're familiar, you might be, Missy, in early intervention
Hmm.
in the school. So I was working with the birth through five population, doing developmental
Oh,
testing, is
okay.
what I was doing at the time. So I was doing developmental testing and then providing cognitive and emotional support
Mm,
for kids, either in therapeutic nursery programs or later on, I was in the public school system and really working with mainly children in foster care, children who had experienced some significant trauma.
okay.
And those were the kids that I was really focused on emotional development.
Yeah. Well, and how do you do that? Like what sort of, could you give us kind of like a little bit of an overview of what that might look like? So if you have somebody who comes to you and you know that they've had some trauma in their lives,
Mhm.
do you sort of create a program that they would follow, or do you just take it kind of day by day, or session by session?
So, are you talking about at the farm or when I was with the school district?
Oh, actually, that's a good question. I was thinking in general, but
It's
but
very
yeah,
different.
but I bet you're right. It probably is very different in the school setting versus the farm setting. So
Yeah.
let's just talk about the farm setting, what you're doing currently.
Okay. You know what? Can I talk about the school system? Because I
Absolutely.
just want to talk, because it actually it has led me to how I practice today. So
Great.
when
Yeah,
I
let's do
went
that.
into the school system, I was always fascinated with why people do what they do. I'm fascinated with watching people's behavior. I was fascinated as a young child with adults around me and why they did things
I'm
and how a lot of things didn't make
I'm so
sense.
sorry. I have to laugh because we've talked about this off the mic. I'll have to just go ahead and tell people that you and I have had so many similarities. It's crazy. And you saying
It
that,
is.
it's like, oh my God, that was me. I was constantly staring at people, watching, observing, taking notes, mental notes. So yeah, go ahead.
Mhm.
Sorry. I just thought that was too
Yeah, no,
funny.
I know, Missy. It's funny. We have this this parallel existence. I knew you'd understand that. So that's why I really went into special ed because I wanted to understand why kids were doing what they were doing. And I also wanted to really connect.
Hmm.
And I saw a lot of disconnection. So when I was with the school district, I loved when I got these kids who were not having success in other environments because I was looking at things differently. So I wanted to be able to connect on a different way. So I was doing, IFSPs and IEPs with the school district. And there's some limitations to that with what I could do and how I could work with kids. And what I mean, I actually was I loved my job. I didn't like the structure that I was working under,
Sure.
and I did not wanna leave, but after a while, I just realized that my values were not really aligned with how I was seeing kids treated in that system, so I just couldn't do the work I wanted to do, so that's when I left,
Hmm.
and so the work at the farm looks very, very different, and when kids come to the farm, the one thing we always say to parents is, you know, we don't want you to say to them you're coming for therapy or you're coming to work on something. It's their time to decide how they want to spend it, get closer to knowing what their own needs are and how to meet their needs. That's really what it's all about. And all of that happens when they're in relationship. So they're really coming to play and have an experience on the farm. I know the kinds of things that might be challenging for them. And I ask lots of questions and then I sort of guide that. But they really are leading me. I'm really taking my cue from them.
Okay.
So like for an example, if I know somebody's coming because they're dealing with anxiety, we might go out to the goats and I might notice that they're not feeling safe. And so I might ask questions about what they think might happen if they go in with the goats. Do they feel safer staying outside? And again, all of that is okay, but it's just getting them more in touch with this is what I need right now. Right now, I need a little bit of distance. Maybe tomorrow I'll go in. And so there's lots of conversation that comes up when we're partnering with the animals.
Mm. Yeah, that makes sense. So it's really trying to get them to become more aware of their body and
Hmm.
they're like you said that earlier, the somatic support and trying to
Hmm.
understand like what the cues are and how to interpret them.
Hmm.
Okay.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's really amazing. And have you noticed, is there sort of like a typical time that it takes kids to sort of warm up to the situation, or is it just so individualized?
It's pretty individual. But it depends what they're coming in with, and some kids who might come in with more comfort, I'll see them spending more time with the animals at first, and then they might wanna spend more time in the studio after a couple of months, and I see them doing lots of sand tray processing or processing with art materials or the therapeutic games, so it really varies. Other kids I notice who may be really nervous about being with the animals, I might just be planting some seeds for next time, like,
Mm,
"Oh, we can always go in and brush, but you let me know when you feel like that's something that you wanna do." And they might show up the next time and say, "Oh, I'm ready to go in."
okay.
And then we might go from that to leading the goats, and we talk a lot about leadership and consensual leadership and leading from behind and what leadership means to them, what power means to them. There's lots of conversations that come up just from being with animals, which is really incredible.
Mm. And do you work with the parents as well while their children are on the farm, or do you have like a
Mhm.
separate time to work with the families to sort of teach them some of these skills?
We have a separate time, and actually, the parent part of our program is something that we are in the process of expanding quite a bit. So, we usually do a couple of sessions with the child, and then we'll meet with the parent because it's really important to us that we have parent input and that we are connecting families
Yeah.
and helping them get stronger. Like, it's huge. Just seeing the child alone, really, I have to say, it you don't get the biggest benefit. So the parents are hugely key. It's all about their parental relationship with their child. So we do a lot of that and we're in like I said, we're trying to come up with more ways to get more parents in to the program, really working with parents. I have a couple of parents that I work with just the parents and not even the child
Yeah.
actually.
Right. Well, and over the years, I know I've certainly experienced that when I was working in the schools and then even on the research projects and things that I've been able to participate in, that there's sometimes this notion that the child is the one that needs the most attention.
Mhm.
And
Right?
usually you're like, well, they have to go back to the situation and back into that environment what's that environment look like? Who are the people? How are they interacting with this child? You can only do so much with the kids and teach them specific things about themselves, but you can't change their
Mhm.
environment for them. So I
Mhm.
do find that to be
Absolutely.
such a huge piece of the mental health puzzle, and supporting the kids to become the best versions of themselves. So,
Right. Right.
speaking of that, one of the things that I wanted us to talk about today was attachment theory. And
Hmm.
I know it's something that you're very familiar with, and some of the posts that you've written and shared, I've appreciated how you lay things out very succinctly, and it makes it, I think, more understandable for people
Hmm.
when because some of these things can be really almost nebulous and like hard to nail down. So I'm just wondering if maybe we could kind of walk through attachment theory and like, what is it? How do we apply it? What does that look like through the years? And then of course eventually get up to like the teen years, and how does that play out, if especially if we started it when they were really young, and maybe kind of how does that impact our teens as that time comes about.
Sure, sure. So, I mean, really, I mean, attachment theory can get more complex if we're talking about different styles of attachment. But the main thing, attachment is really our emotional bond and connection to each other.
Hmm.
And when we talk about attachment parenting, we're really talking about that attachment to a primary caregiver. That's where it begins, right? With the primary caregiver. And then when you have secure attachment, it starts to sort of branch out to other people. The child can take that secure attachment template, so to speak, right? And then um, sort of uh, integrate that into other people. So, did you want me to go into more, Missy, of like the actual? I think we would get lost if we talk about different styles. Really, what we're talking about is secure attachment. And that
Yes.
means, right,
Yeah, no, I
right,
agree. I think if we get too much into it, it starts getting hard to
right.
follow when you're listening. So yeah, no, I like that.
Right. So really that's what we're talking about is the child needs to have a secure attachment with the parent. And what that means is a parent that they know that they can trust, that's predictable and that they know is safe. And when all of that is in place, the child is able to learn, relate, experience their emotions in a safe way. And that's ideally what we want to see happening with kids. And so, especially in the past work that I've done, a lot of that attachment gets disrupted for various reasons. There's always ways to go in and repair it, but it starts really young.
Yeah.
So actually this just came up. I was talking to somebody yesterday, and hesitant to even bring this up because I know some people still use these. Some of the ways that we intervene to sort of manage behavior are disrupting attachment. So I'll just say right off the bat that some people are still using timeouts, and I get it. It's encouraged for a lot of families, but we have to be really careful that no matter what strategy you're using when you're working with your child, that we're not just managing behaviors, that we are thinking about that connection and that we keep that relationship intact. Does that make sense what I'm saying, Missy?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think what is important to consider is that it what tends to happen, I think, is people create they do an action that they feel like is going to stop the
Hmm.
behavior, but really what they're doing is missing an opportunity for connection to understand where the behavior
Yes.
came from.
Yes. And that,
So
yeah, go ahead. Sorry, Missy.
no, I was just going to say, over the years, I heard going from time out to time in,
Hmm.
and instead of it being you separate from the child and send them away because they're quote unquote doing something wrong or bad or whatever, you instead wrap their arms around them and bring them close and get on eye level, or sit down together and discuss the situation, or even just sit quietly for a few minutes, whether or not if the child's dysregulated, maybe crying or just feeling really overwhelmed, maybe even tantruming.
Hmm.
If just stay within a close distance, but let them know you're there, and then help them sort of regulate their nervous system. But I guess it would be important to note that if the parent's nervous system
Yes.
is out of
Yep.
whack, you know there is a case to be made that maybe everybody does need to take a breather,
Mhm.
but it could be also done in such a way that says, this situation is really out of control and we all need to just take a breath and
Yes.
have a couple of minutes. and and I think that, that seems perfectly normal and or perfectly okay to do if everybody's really upset.
That is the exact conversation I had yesterday, so it's so funny,
Oh,
the
wow.
exact thing that I said, because it was a situation where everybody's nervous system was just completely dysregulated. There's a
Mhm.
big difference in saying, "Whew, let's, let's take a moment away and let's come back when we,
Yeah.
we feel more grounded." It's very different than sit in this chair for 6 minutes, because this
Yeah.
is how old you are. It's just such a different feeling, and
Mhm.
even like you said, you mentioned dysregulation. I I love that this is becoming more common language now. So I'm also a yoga therapist. I didn't add that, but in this whole,
Yeah.
in my whole journey of how to study relationship and understand behavior, I'm a big movement person, and movement has always been a way for me to move my own energy. So when my friend and I started this farm program, she was like, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if you pursued this yoga
Mhm.
training to add that to some of the workshops that we were doing, so that when we got participants, we got people into their bodies first, and then they were able to really connect in very, very different ways." So anyway, in that yoga therapy training, I'm really trained in understanding nervous system health and how our thoughts impact our nervous system, how our own physical activity affects our nervous system, stress, and all of that. So, when we're looking at kids that are melting down, I often say to families, you share a nervous system. I know for myself,
Mhm.
when I'm more stressed out, my kids are going to reflect it. I always say kids are like a barometer of what's happening for us. So if they're freaking out, it's a real time to pause and look at ourselves and see, like, okay, what's happening here? Am I contributing to this? How can I help this? And again, being regulated ourselves doesn't mean that we're always at this calm place. It just means that we can, we might get a little bit activated, but we can come back down to this centered place. Like you mentioned before, stepping away for a moment, and then we can come back.
Yeah. Well, I was always fascinated with my first, well, both kids, but my firstborn, just because, they're the ones that teach you how to be a parent.
Yeah, yep.
and and he would just pick up on my mood change in a nanosecond. And I was just like, whoa, I didn't even think my facial expression changed or anything. He'd be like, "We smile, mommy," I was like, oh my
Don't
goodness.
you love
But
that?
yes, he would just so in tune. And I was always floored at how quickly he would pick up on any sort of shift or like even and we talked about it, especially when he got older, and I talked to both my kids, like, you can sense that feeling when you walk in a room.
Yep.
You sense it. You know who's in a bad mood, who to stay away from, who you can go to, who you feel comfortable and safe around. I was like, so that's powerful stuff. And the earlier I think we can help our kids
Yes.
tap into that, and it starts at home. So you want them to be able to openly share with the parents and the caregivers how their body is feeling, and to be able to put words to that. um, and maybe we'll get into a little bit more about, like, the importance of recognizing how our bodies feel and what our emotions are kind of signaling to
Mhm.
us, but also the importance of not living there.
Yeah, yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up, because I think that's huge. And that's actually a big part of the work that we do with animals. Because, I know that you're a dog person and you understand animals, and they often pick up what we're feeling before we even know it. It's the same way with our
Mhm.
kids. And it's because animals don't have language. Some of them are prey animals. They have to be really attuned. And so, as
Yeah.
parents, we have to be really attuned to our kids, but in order to be attuned to our kids, we have to be really attuned to ourselves. So it takes so much self reflection to figure out our own needs. And yeah, I think when we say to our kids, oh, everything's fine, they know when it's not. And I had a similar
Yeah,
moment
they can they can
with
sense
one of
it.
my
They're like, "That's
boys
BS."
that I knew. I was like, okay, I'm doing this right. years ago, I had to do some very minor surgery on my finger. And it was the night before, and I was feeling stressed and a bit nervous about it. And I was not my best self with my kids. And I was kind of short with one of my sons. And he looked right at me and he said, Mom, I know you're just nervous about your surgery tomorrow. And I thought,
Oh.
whoa, like it stopped me in my tracks. And I thought, how amazing that he knew it wasn't him. He
Hmm.
didn't get defensive. He felt safe enough to say to me, Mom, I know you're feeling stressed. That just melted me. And then we were connected again. And that is
Hmm.
a secure attachment. And that's where we want to be with our kids so that they feel safe enough to say those kinds of things to us. And that's where the
Hmm.
learning, I think, comes from being a parent. It's just huge when we can slow down and sort of absorb and integrate those moments. They're just huge.
They really are. They're pretty pivotal moments, and what you were mentioning earlier about how if maybe somebody didn't start out with a secure attachment, and maybe how you can kind of work towards that. I know we could really get into the weeds here, so
Mhm.
I don't want to really go down in the direction of like a therapy session
Sure, sure.
necessarily, but sort of the ideas behind
Mhm.
repair, because that's a huge piece of the conversation that definitely is being, I think, shared on social media and in the general circles of people who are interested in this sort of conversation, is like, what is repair and what does that mean? And is repair 100% effective? And are there certain things you can't repair?
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I guess it's not an absolute answer that we can have, because I know every child's different,
Right.
every child's temperament's different, and what might impact one kid
Mhm.
really severely or pretty significantly, the other one can just brush right off and it not even phase them.
Right.
So, but what would you give as
Right.
some
Right.
examples or
And
guidance?
every parent's different too, right? Every
True.
parent on their own journey of self-realization is at a different point. But I would say it
Yes.
starts with we have to really trust in ourselves and trust our kids, and start by trying your hardest to see them for who they are. It's really hard when let me give an example. Maybe there's been some disconnect done because your child is a teen and they're having problems with school or problems socially, and sometimes we respond from this place of fear, right? Like, you should do this, or we think we're helping, but we're
Mm,
really not letting them have their experience. And a lot of the time, they don't need us to fix them. They just need us to see them and give them the space to take space. And so that's a really hard
right.
thing to do when we have fears as parents. But I would say it starts by listening, like really listen to what your teen or your child is saying to you. Give them space to be alone or come to you when they need you. I'm trying to think of what else would repair.
Well, and I think too, it just popped in my
Or
head about replay or restating
mm,
back to them what they say to you, so that you can really ensure that you're hearing exactly what it is they're saying. Because sometimes we may hear them and we might interpret it a little differently in our brain. But if we're able to restate it, and then they can correct us, or they can be like, yeah, exactly.
yes, and that's such a good point, Missy, too, because not only do we make sure that we're understanding their message, but it gives them a chance to dive a little bit deeper into like what
Mm,
they said and their own values. I've done this a lot with teens, and it's really interesting. Sometimes they might actually, when they hear it said back to them, they're like, you know what? I don't really believe that. So it really, again, it's giving them the space to figure
hmm.
out their own values and what they're saying. And I love that. I love that about self-directed education, because it's giving people the time to dig into their own values. Like, I love when people ask me questions about, well, why did you do it this way? Because it helps me become more clear on why I am doing something a certain way.
Yes, yes. Gosh, it's so true. And every time I write about it or talk about it to somebody else, it just gets more and more solidified.
Right?
And my understanding of it even gets better. And I thought, sometimes I think I already understand it all. And then I go and write something or hear somebody else say something. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, it's even better.
Right.
Now understand it even more. Yeah, that's so great to have a couple of ideas sort of that parents can pull from, almost like this, like the toolbox, our emotional toolkit that we have, and how we can consider using certain not tactics but techniques,
Right.
really. I mean,
Right.
it's relationship techniques, it's communication, and how we can ensure that we're taking the time to really get to know the people that we love.
Mhm, mhm. And I think slowing down helps a lot, often, especially when we're in sort of fear mode, we wanna control more. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so worried, about my child." But if we slow down and step back, sometimes it becomes more clear what we need to do. And also something else that I do a lot, and I still do this with my kids, they're 19 and 20. If I'm feeling fear, I still get it, like, will they be okay in the world? Are they going to find their path? I say it to them like, "Hey, I'm having these concerns, and talk to me." And they have a secure enough relationship with me that they know where that's coming from, and they don't feel like they have to protect me. They know that I can handle anything they're going to say to me, but we have this open dialogue, so I can say, "Hey, I've got these concerns." And every time that I get really honest and curious and authentic with them, it's like this long exhale afterwards. I always feel
Mm,
better, always. And so
mhm.
I've learned, like you said, the more we articulate this, the more we do this, that trust is just huge. And being
Yeah.
comfortable with being uncomfortable. Because, I mean, look, if COVID showed us anything, it was that the world is not certain, right?
Yeah.
And I think we saw so many people struggling because we need such certainty in our lives. And I saw the people who were able to kind of flow with uncertainty handled it a lot better. So it's just huge. And I see my kids actually better at it than I am. So I am continually learning from them, but it's asking questions. Again, I say to people step back, but it's this dance of stepping back, but also being comfortable asking questions, but be really careful that your questions aren't coming from a place of fear and trying to control it versus like real curiosity, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Oh, absolutely, and I love that you led with, like, you presented it to your son as, "I'm having the
Mhm.
problem." Like, "I need a little bit more clarification," instead of, "You're doing this and this and this, and it's making me,"
Exactly.
as if the person has control over your emotions. That's one of the biggest problems and issues I think a lot of relationships fall into, is that if someone is done a behavior, then they're the ones that have made you feel a
Mhm.
certain way, and people don't take ownership over their own emotions. So the fact that you led with, "I'm feeling a certain way because of my concerns and my fears. I'm wondering if maybe we can walk through this a little bit
Yeah,
more."
yeah. It's such a good point because what I have found in the beginning of all this, when I was, a younger parent, when you and it's with any relationship, when you lead with "you're doing this to me," I mean, all it does is put the other person on defense. But when
For
I
sure.
own it, "This is my issue, can you help me?" Number 1, they feel seen, they don't feel defensive, and they wanna help me out. That's we have this relationship where it's reciprocal, and we partner with a lot of decisions. So leading with that makes such a big difference, like, "Hey, this is what I'm feeling. Can you help me out?"
Yeah. One of one of my biggest memories of of college was, in a communications class, and I loved my professor. He was so funny and great. But one of the things he said, it was like, "People cannot make you feel a certain way. It's merely your reaction to something they said." And I thought that that was like the most life-changing statement probably.
Yes.
And it really stuck with me forever and ever. And it also contributed greatly to how I showed up as a mom. Not that I had all the pieces in order and didn't flounder, because I definitely did. But what I think it helped me helped me really lead and teach my children that you don't hand your keys, don't hand the keys to your heart and your emotions to somebody else
Mhm.
to control. So, you know, because if you allow people's behaviors and attitudes and, you know, ideas to constantly affect your emotional state, then you're never going to be settled because there's constant things happening around you, and it's our responses are what's important. And so the best thing we can do for our children is to model that with them.
Yes.
um, and I remember there was a time when the whole video gaming with my son, when he was, I want to say probably around 10ish maybe, and he had some older kids on the neighborhood who played some games that I just didn't know about. And I remember feeling really
Mhm.
scared. And I told him no to something and he got upset. And then I remember being like, okay, this is my fear. He's obviously extremely excited about this opportunity. We have to work through this. And so I went back to him and said, listen, this seems like it's really important to you. I'm very confused about what exactly it is you're wanting to do. So can you give me a little bit more time? And he was like, okay, I can do that. So kind of like, okay, she's meeting me somewhere. Like
Mhm.
we're gonna work this out. And I just remember feeling so horrible because it was like I was so scared that whatever it was he was going to play was going to somehow negatively impact him, and just that, just I was caught up in what is said a lot of times about what's happening with video games and boys. And
Mhm.
so that's sort of, part of the trajectory that we were on, working through what I was being told was the truth and then what I was also witnessing. Because the truth is, like, you look at the child in front of you and you will see, are they stable? Are they, joyful? Are they able to learn something, or are they able to see something? And if they're concerned, do they come to you with questions? So, it's kind of like we try to put these blanket statements on how to handle certain things, and we just have to come back over and over again to, like, look at the kid, look at the child, look at your child.
Mhm.
um so yeah, that was one of those big moments as a mom for me.
Yeah. And you're as you're speaking, I'm thinking about how I think parenting has become so confusing because there's so many, like you were saying, with screen time or video games, what it will do to our kids. We get so
Hmm.
taken out of ourselves that we don't even see the child in front of us, and we completely lose our intuitive abilities. Like, I had a similar experience with one of my sons who, neither one of my kids ever played video games, but one of my sons one summer got really into video games. And I remember feeling that panic, like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen to him?
Yeah.
And after a few months, it just dissipated. It just went away because he had a lot of other interests. But I found myself not able to see him anymore. And I was just focused on all of the sort of societal noise out there about telling me what's going to happen. And that is such a dangerous place to be parenting from. And I think it's such an easy trap, and it happens to a lot of us. And somehow, I was just talking to my mom about this the other day. It seems like we've gotten away from intuitive parenting. And intuitive parenting to
Hmm.
me is being very attuned to your kids. And I always think of it like keeping it's great to have theory, and I'm so glad I understand child development, but that's always in the back of my head. And I'm just guiding myself by how it feels. And that's something I would say to parents. If it doesn't feel right, stop doing it.
Hmm.
If you're doing something with your child, whether it's a behavior management thing or something that you think you're supposed to be doing, if it doesn't feel right, pay attention to that. That kind of goes back to
Yeah.
what we were saying earlier about paying attention. We miss all these body cues that are really so intelligent, and we bypass it and go right up to our head, and we try and rationalize things away. I often hear people say, I knew when I was doing it, I shouldn't be doing it. But we don't trust
Mm.
that. It's like these fleeting voices that come into our heads and we dismiss it. And I would say pay attention to that. Always pay attention to how you feel. Also, because often how we feel is how our kids are feeling, especially when they're really young. We pick up on each other, right? And so
Oh, yeah.
really just pay attention to all of that.
Yes, definitely. And you're right. We do get separated from our bodies. And, particularly with the whole idea of, now you're 5 and you go to school because school is where you
Mhm.
learn. And now you just are focused on what your brain can retain and spit back
Mhm.
out. And the whole body awareness piece just gets lost in the shuffle. It's almost like the schools say, just send me your kid, I'll take the brain, and then you parents deal with the rest later.
Mhm.
There's not that combined, like, um, integrated way of being with another human.
Right.
So, speaking going back to your farm ex
Mhm.
program, it's called a program,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Farm
Yeah.
program? So going back to that, would you say then that that's one of the pieces from your public school experience to now having this, that for sure you're doing the whole body, the whole person?
Absolutely. If I can just backtrack a little bit, because when you were sharing that, about kids go to school, they turn 5, I had an experience that was really one of the pivotal experiences why when I left the school district, I knew I wasn't comfortable with how the emotional development of children was being met, at least in the school where I was at. And I remember
Mhm.
observing, I had had a child that I worked with until he was 5, and then he went to kindergarten and was having all sorts of challenges. So they called me in to observe him. And it was very, very early in the morning. I mean, I think they started like 7:30, and they were doing handwriting, and they were looking at an overhead projector and copying letters. And he kept saying, "My hand is so tired. I'm so tired." And the teacher and
Mm.
assistant, very well intended, were trying to encourage him, kept coming over and saying, "Oh, it's so early. You just got here. You can't be tired." And he kept on for about 10 or 15 minutes. "Oh, I'm so tired. My hand hurts. My hand hurts." And continually he was told, "Oh, it can't hurt. It's early. You're just saying that." And soon enough, after about 15 minutes, he just gave up. And he
Mm.
just slumped in his seat and kind of tried to write but was getting corrected. And I just thought, like, that's one small example, but that's just a piece. It's the beginning of how we teach kids not to trust their bodies. Whether he was really tired or not wasn't the thing. He was needing some kind of connection. He was needing something at the moment. And when we just dismiss them, they start to learn pretty quickly that, well, these adults are telling me this is nothing, and they start to override any sort of internal experience that they're happening. So, for us, one of the biggest and most important parts of our homeschooling was when my kids had their off days. I remember, one day in particular it stuck out in my mind that one of my sons was just laying by the window saying, "I don't feel like doing anything today." And I remember feeling so good about telling him, "Then don't. Pay attention. Your body is telling you it's tired. Take today and see what tomorrow brings." Because I know he's not going to lay there forever. I really trusted that. And sure enough, the next day he was up and motivated to pursue lots of things. And I think that's so important. I see so many adults that are sick because they're overworking themselves and they feel guilty. A lot of parents will tell me, "I feel guilty if I'm just quiet or I'm not doing anything." So I think it's huge that we
Mm.
start with children younger. Pay
Right.
attention to
Well,
that.
I'm going to read you this little piece. It's so crazy because this book happens to be sitting right beside me. It's the Hunter Gatherer's Guide to the 21st
Mm-hmm.
Century: Evolution and the Challenges of Modern Life. And it's by Heather Haying and Brett Weinstein. And they have a whole section on school. And I'm just going to read this part. I had already highlighted it, not at all anticipating what we were talking about, but I just can't believe how much it
Of
fits into what
course,
we're
of
saying.
course.
So I know it says, using fear to keep children seated in neat and tidy rows, to keep their eyes forward and their mouths closed, to keep them from moving their bodies at all but for a few selected moments in each day. This will help create adults who are unable to regulate their own bodies and senses, unable to trust in their own ability to make decisions, and likely to demand similarly controlled environments in their adult lives.
Mm.
So it's just pretty crazy that
It's
was a part.
exactly it, right? It's exactly it. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the part about, regulating in their adult lives, we want kids to be regulated. And I would say that kids are actually naturally trying to, this little boy was probably trying to regulate himself. And
Mm-hmm.
we don't even recognize it in children because we don't recognize it in ourselves. And it's really making us sick as an adult population that we don't
Yeah.
really have the self-regulatory abilities. So often, kids are running around, they need to run around, they need to move their bodies. That's how they're trying to regulate. And we tell them, no, stop.
Yeah. We overcome
Mhm.
them. We tell them that what they're experiencing and feeling isn't right.
And then
And
oh, sorry, Missy. To just make
no, go
all these
ahead. No,
ideas
go
are
right
popping
ahead.
in my head. And then to bring that back to attachment, like how does that impact your attachment with someone? Because you're really not being seen. They don't feel heard. Because I know if someone was doing
Mm-hmm.
that to me, I would probably have a pretty insecure attachment with that person because I no longer feel safe. If you don't feel seen and heard, you don't feel safe. And again, we learn best when our nervous systems are relaxed and we feel seen, safe, and heard.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'm not gonna push back on you. It's more like a question.
Mhm.
It's more like, because I can hear sort of maybe some old school thoughts people in the back of my head saying, "Yes, but
Mhm.
if you don't push kids,
Sure.
they're never gonna try
Mhm.
anything." Or if you don't tell them that they can, then they're just gonna think that
Mhm.
they're always gonna be able to get out of things or
Uh-huh.
whatever, kind of like manipulating the
Sure.
system, so to speak. So what would you say to the person who's questioning this idea that if you're listening to the kids and you're responding to how they're feeling and you're
Mhm.
hearing them, seeing them, are you essentially setting them up to always opt out because they just don't feel
I
like it?
love this question. This whole answer, I love this question because it's really important. There's
Mhm.
two parts to the question. Um, so kids learn, I had just posted about this actually. Kids learn to persevere and be accountable by doing something that they actually love. And I'll give the example of my one son who builds with Lego. He loves designing, he makes his own creations, he's traveled all over to
Mm.
these different um, conventions since he was about 12. And
Oh, wow, that's
yeah,
great.
and we used to have to enter with him because it's an adult conventions that he enters. And anyway, through all of this, like I knew there was something special with his Lego building, but I did have that fear like, well, he's spending his whole day building with Lego. How is he ever going to learn any sort of accountability? Well, what he learned from that passion was he learned how to meet deadlines. He learned how to like branch out into some pretty uncomfortable new situations. He learned how to collaborate with people. He learned how to network. He learned how to present his work. Like he put himself into so many new and different situations because he was inspired to be there. And what that has taught him, so fast forward now, he's taking college courses that he doesn't love. He's doing it because he may want to pursue a certain degree that he would need college, but he has the
Mhm.
integrity to persevere because it's almost embodied. He doesn't fear making mistakes. He understands what it's like to do meaningful work. So I would say that we almost turn kids off when we push them to do things that they're not connected to. It's almost like they learn to
Mhm.
dissociate and yeah, they might reach a goal, but they're not connected to it. So what and really what they take away is, oh, I hate doing that. So what good is that doing versus I see both of my kids. My other son is a musician and he perseveres with his composing and self-study and he puts himself in new situations because he learning and being uncomfortable are not things that feel threatening to him.
Yeah.
I'm not sure
Yeah,
I answered
no,
your
that's
question. Did I answer that question?
no, I think you did. I mean, I do think that I'm sure there could be multiple questions that could spin off of that, but it kind of makes me go back to what you said earlier about the pandemic and how a lot of people were thrown sort of into chaos. And I can't help but to wonder if part of it was not because there was so much external control
Yeah, absolutely.
on many people's lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So this whole system that's been in place that basically told people when to get up, when to go to bed, when to eat, when to vacation was gone.
Hmm.
So now what do we do? What do we do? What do we do?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And so I think people who were already kind of living sort of with that internal locus of control were sort of like, okay, things are different, but we're good.
Hmm. Yep.
We're just going to roll with it because we didn't really need a lot of those systems that were operating kind of almost robotically in a
Right.
way,
Right.
that they were there, they were just ongoing. And I believe that when we do work with our kids from an early age to listen,
Hmm.
to hear,
Hmm.
to pay attention, we're giving them a lot more power
Absolutely.
to control themselves and their
Yeah.
future.
And just to add, now I'm remembering my other part to that, asking like how do we get kids then to branch out and try new things? Part of it is it has to do with a secure attachment. So if we are, what's the intention behind, let me back up. So if I were to notice with my own child that they were, purposely avoiding something that I felt like I had this gut feeling this would be really good for them, we talk about
Hmm.
it again. Like we talk about it, and I'm losing my train of thought now
No, that's okay.
because I have a thought, Missy, but I'm not able to articulate it completely.
Yeah.
So forget that. Scratch
Well,
that.
no, it'll come to you. It'll come to you.
Yeah.
I'll throw this out because talking about listening for our kids listening to themselves. So my daughter loved gymnastics. Well, she did it all on her own. She taught herself all this stuff. She was very flexible. And so she decided she wanted to take a gymnastics class. She was only 5. And I was when my firstborn, I never was like thinking any kid needed to be in a class at age 5. Like it was just like they just go have fun.
Right.
But she wanted to do it. And she was great at it and she had a blast. And the 2 teachers were adorable and they were just so good with the kids. But then it became time for her to move up. And it was like, okay, you've mastered our little section, so now it's time for you to move to the next teachers. Well, she'd had an experience where she witnessed one of the teachers that she was going to be with being very kind of rude and dismissive to some children, and it stuck with her.
Mhm.
And she told me about it, but I didn't realize that this was going to be the person that was in her grouping. And sure enough, we go the next time to the new class, and the teacher comes out, and there's a main teacher and an assistant, I should say. The main teacher introduced herself and everything, and then the assistant came out, and I could tell. I was like, oh, that's her, because I could tell the way my daughter was behaving because I didn't know exactly who it was. And so she kind of went on, and I just could see in her body language, it's like she's not going to like this. And next thing you know, I see her holding her stomach and kind of talking to the teachers, and they came over and she was like, my stomach hurts. I'm like, I bet it does. Like in my head, I said, I bet it does. I was like, okay, that's fine. We don't have to stay. And she's like, I don't want to. And I was like, okay. So we get in the car, and sure enough, that's what it was. And I remember being like, I am so glad I listened to her, because if I had been like, you're fine, your stomach doesn't hurt, oh my God, just go back. And it could have just totally separated her
Yes.
from herself, from me, and from the experience. And it's not going to make her stronger. This whole idea that if you just tell them to push that feeling away and get over it, okay. Is it going to Some people might say, well, they might be a better gymnast, or they might have gotten over it and been more resilient maybe in the future. But I think there is definitely a window of time there where you're thinking, especially when they're 5, 5's little, they're just like, my body feels uncomfortable and I need to get out of this situation. And you are the person that I trust the most. And you're the one that's going to save me. And I think that's what we're supposed to do.
Absolutely. And because we talked about attachment and how attachment plays out in the teen years, this is huge because when kids become practiced at this at a young age, like your 5-year-old is saying, this doesn't feel right, I need to leave. Then when they become teens and we're not going to always be with them, they have that
Mm,
inner compass that says, you know what? This isn't a good choice. I'm not going to make it. And I have seen it over and over and over again with the kids who have been giving the space to pay attention
right.
to their own needs. They will make better choices as teens. It's just it does not, the teen years, you know this, do not have to be filled with rebellion. When they understand themselves and they feel safe with that, they will make better choices. And this is what I was going to say before, and now I'm remembering it. If we see patterns coming up with our kids, I've had conversations like, do you notice that, oh, every time you're starting something new, I notice this happens. Do you notice that? And talk about it, because
Mm,
it gives them the opportunity to get closer at themselves, right? Without saying, hey, you're always quitting this, or hey, you never want to do this. Let them explore why. There could be a really good reason that we are not in their bodies. We are not experiencing what they're experiencing. But this is all about relationship and opportunities to connect without judgment and just with pure curiosity with who's in front of you. And I just think the more kids get to know themselves, the better able they are to make good decisions later in life. And again,
mm-hmm.
we see so many adults struggling right now with that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and just to further that point about making those decisions, or you making the observation about what happens with your son or
mhm,
your child. That's the whole point of relationship. We're in a family unit, and like you said earlier, we're kind of like a nervous system that's all connected. If part of the nervous system is off and the other part over here just continues to ignore that, then we can't get corrected, or we can't right ourselves, or we can't you know have a resolution.
mhm.
So that's the whole point of that family unit, is that we do help each other notice the things that maybe we're not doing or
Right.
being our best selves. Or if we've joked here throughout my kids growing years, of like being steady,
Mhm,
or like, mom, you're not being steady.
mhm,
Or my son, one time, I guess I don't even remember it, they were younger and I was just overwhelmed. I think I just needed to get out of the house because we had maybe multiple days in a row where we were home, and I'm one of those people that needs to pop out and I can pop back in,
mhm,
I can pop out, pop back in. I don't necessarily need to be out of the house every single day, but I definitely can't be in the house like 4, 5, 6 days in a row.
mhm.
And he was like, and I was like, I'm going to the store. I'll see y'all later. And my husband was home and
Right.
the kids were fine. But Daniel, my son, later was like, Mom, you rage quit life.
Ah, I love it.
I was like, no. And I just laughed about it because he was like, you were just like, I got to get out of here. Bye. And he joked about it. It wasn't like he was upset or anything. He just called me out on it. I was like, yeah, you're kind of right. I was sort of just overwhelmed and was like, I got to go.
Don't you
But
love
I
that?
love that he felt comfortable doing that, because it's true, when you are able to be in that conscious relationship with other people and they say something about the way you're behaving, you don't take offense to it,
Mhm.
because you trust them
Exactly.
and you respect them and they respect you. And so it's not coming from this judgment. It's more like a, hey, I know you could be better,
Mhm.
or I know that things could look differently, and or maybe you might want to check yourself.
Yep, yep. Yeah, and that's
Yeah.
the key. I mean, when COVID hit, we had all of us home, and
Mhm.
I talked to so many families who were struggling and they needed their space and they couldn't figure things out. We were so we had my husband had been laid off and then he got another job. There were so many pretty significant transitions happening for us, and I couldn't believe how fluid we were because we're
Yeah.
so used to collaborating. So again, it all has to do with, focusing on relationship, connection, knowing that it's not always blissful here. I mean, right?
Right, of
But it's
course.
credibility. I mean, I don't want to make it sound like everything's rosy because we're a real family. We have real challenges, but we're able to come back to center without flying off the handle all the time. And that's just huge. And that feels safe for our kids. And for a lot of parents who haven't had that, there you can always work on it. I mean, I love working with parents who are at the point where they realize, wait, I need to change, because that when I change, my child's going to change. And I love that, because that's all it takes is your own awareness, and you can start changing and repairing and focusing on relationship.
Yeah, it's so important. Well, I kind of want to talk about the teen years a little bit more because here, let me see if I can work it out
Sure.
what I want to say. You mentioned the idea of the teen years being like the turmoil,
Hmm.
but some people get worried about the teenage
Hmm.
years and the drama and things like that. So, what about the attachment theory and the application of the attachment theory in the younger years? How does
Hmm.
that buffer and support
Hmm.
the teenage years?
Sure. I think that's a really good question, because I see a lot of parents who practice attachment parenting in the younger years, and then they get to those teen years or the tween years, and I've heard people call it detachment.
Mm,
And I have to say, that doesn't sit well when I hear that. And I understand what they're saying, that teenagers need, it's this time of individuation, they need more autonomy, they're figuring out who they are. But I think the attachment is still there in such a deep way. It just looks a bit different. So I remember actually when my kids were young and started to get a little bit older, I realized pretty early on they actually needed me more when they were older than when they were younger. In some ways, it was so much easier to meet their needs when they were younger. Now they were becoming these real individuals, and I had to change my, not my relationship, but how we were in relationship together. So, for example, I noticed a big transition when they were about 12 years old, that they needed me in a very different way. And definitely around 16 or 17, you've probably seen this as well. So I would say, when they're younger, sometimes we are helping them figure out their emotions. We might be helping them with more physical needs. When they
mhm.
get to be teens, I would say there's more listening involved, like really listening, giving them space when they need space, and not taking it personally. I think it's really easy to think, you might throw something out there, an idea of what you want to do, and they don't want to do it. And then you take it personally. So we really have to practice not taking things personally, validating their ideas and opinions, even if we don't agree. I mean, this is their time. We can't make someone adopt our values.
Mm-mm.
We can't make somebody care. And I think teens are just, they need to express themselves. So we need to give them that space to be who they are, to make mistakes and still support them. So I think it looks very differently, but we are still deeply connected. I made a conscious effort when my kids got a bit older, especially the last few years, because they're 19 and 20 and still living at home. And I have to really give them more, like, they're adults living in the house now.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
but we are so deeply connected. And I'll give an example. Actually, one of my sons is very emotionally um, verbal. He can articulate his feelings. My other son, he is very sensitive, but does not articulate his emotions or connection in the same way. And often I'll notice I'll be in my bedroom at night watching TV or reading a book, and he'll just come in and sit in the chair in my room, and he's on his phone, and he's just there with
Mhm.
me. And
Mhm.
I've noticed, oh, like, he's connecting. That's
Yeah, oh,
his
yeah.
check-in. And I'll be on my computer, whatever I'm doing. But as soon as he says something to me, I'll drop everything I'm doing, because that's our moment to connect.
Right.
And it's when he's ready. And so I noticed that with both of my older kids, that that's what attachment looks like. I'm not, grilling him on every little thing, but I'm picking up when, often we'll just all sit together in the living room, and that's their way of just connecting. And
Yeah.
when they want to talk, they talk. And so it's giving them that space. I mean, you probably, because you have older kids, so you understand that, right?
Mhm. Well, and I was just gonna say it's like the zone of proximity. It's that
Mhm.
you don't have to have a conversation, but it's that they're showing that they're connecting to you because they're just in
Mhm.
your field of presence, your
Yeah.
energy field even. Um, and, I was going to say too about the changes that happen when our kids do become teenagers. You as a parent are having to relearn a few things. You're having to learn to not
Mm-hmm.
say something. You're having to learn to step back more and give them that space to try things out and maybe even fail.
Mm-hmm.
Not like you're going to just watch our kids do something completely irreversible, but we can't always do it for them. It's like we were talking about
Yeah.
before. I think we started recording that, part of our experience as either coaching other families or working with other parents is that you have to talk to them about what the possibilities are, but you can't do it for them. They have to go
Mm-hmm.
through it to get to the other side to then look back. Because, like, as somebody who has a 20-year-old and a 15-year-old, I have a perspective now because of what I've been through with both of these children that I can relay to someone else, but they still can't apply it
Mm-hmm.
because they haven't had those same milestones and those same trials and the same joys. So, but they can kind of hear about it and go, oh, okay, these are
Absolutely.
things to possibly look out for. This is maybe something to take into consideration. Maybe these are the ways I can communicate and connect. And so, one of the things I say to my kids is just remember, I've been your mom for a long time. And sometimes you just need to tell me when I'm over momming or
Mm-hmm.
just
Yep. Yep.
intervening too much. And that's like, I'm never going to not be your mom. I can just tell
I
you that
say
right
the
now.
same
Do you
thing.
really?
It's I say the Missy, I say the exact same thing. I'm just a mom. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I'm just a mom. I can't help it. I love
I
that.
know. And I mean, I'm just trying to be honest and they know. And even because, so my daughter has type 1 diabetes and she was diagnosed at age 11 and it was a shocker for our family and for
Mhm.
her and for me. And it was just like, wow. But her, um, and I get concerned that I'm overbearing sometimes and asking too many questions. And I tell her, I'm like, please tell me if I'm too
Mhm.
much. She's like, you're not. It's okay. It's okay. And I will tell you too, she calls me Missy. And
Oh, I love it.
all of her friends are like, "What? Did you just call your mom Missy?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I mean, it's a funny joke. And she's like, "Well, she responds to that. If we're in a group of people, there's 10
Mhm.
kids saying mom, mom, mom. If she says Missy, I turn around."
I love it.
But she'll say, "No, you're fine." And mom, I actually like you to check in and ask me because sometimes I just, forget or just don't think about it. And but again, it goes back to communicating and just being
Yeah.
honest and saying, "Hey, I have some anxiety about this and I'm feeling this way." You know, just if I'm being too much, I need you to tell me. And
And and it's so great, Missy, because this all goes back to that secure attachment that
mhm.
that that my kids say the same thing to me. They actually want my input. And I was thinking as you were speaking before, coming to the teen years, when we focus on relationship and we focus on really connecting with our kids, they are more willing to listen to our ideas because we do have wisdom. I think the biggest mistake that people make with attachment parenting or trying to be gentle is we cross over into this permissive
Yes.
place,
Mhm.
which we could do probably a whole podcast on that, right? And
Right.
this is not about being permissive at all because we have our own boundaries. Like what you and I are talking about is we have our own boundaries, and boundaries are really healthy and they're really clear. And because our kids understand that and see it and respect it, like my teens will ask me for my advice. Doesn't mean they're going to do it, but they're more apt when you've worked on relationship and connection. They're more apt to listen. They care about what you say, right? And
Mhm.
that's exactly what you're talking about with your daughter.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I yeah, have seen it time and time again. And I was going to say today I just saw something on Instagram of mom. I think her name is Dr. Vanessa Lapointe. She's
Hmm.
a
Hmm.
parenting person, and she said the same thing about the whole like attachment parenting and how sometimes it can cross into permissive. And she's like, I
Ah.
call them the flowery meadow families or the flowery meadow moms who are like, my children are just floating through a flowery meadow all the time. It's like, the unrealistic sort of this romanticized idea that if I just
Mhm.
allow my children to be, everything's just going to be fine. It's just going to,
Right.
and kids need us as their guides. They need us as that support. They need a container to thrive
Absolutely.
within. And they also need us to lead, and there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't mean you're overpowering them. That means you're showing them, you're modeling, you're,
Exactly.
and yes, of course, we're not perfect and we make mistakes, but that's where that communication again comes in. That's where that whole like taking a moment and taking stock of the situation, reading the room, um,
Hmm.
and asking, hey, am I too much? Am I doing too much? Am I in your way?
Right, right.
So, and that's that those, I think that language is so powerful. And unfortunately, a lot of people, myself included, we didn't grow up that way. We didn't grow up with our parents actually saying, hey, did I just overstep?
Right,
Nobody,
right,
it's
right.
like nobody asked that question. You just kind of went to
Right.
your room and were like, dang, all right then.
Right,
um,
and then they don't get to practice that at a young
mm-mm.
age. Like, what better time to practice making mistakes, communicating, articulating your thoughts and feelings when you're young and you've got this, like, this this container to practice,
Yes.
versus, what we brought up earlier about just pushing kids through and making them do things because it's really gonna be what's best for them. There's just missed opportunities in that, really,
Yes.
really missed opportunities that at some point I just really believe come back to haunt you later in life, because at
Hmm.
some point we all have to be able, like my 20-year-old said this, the problem with the world is that people just are not able to process and digest their emotions. So we do all sorts of crazy things to bypass our emotions. And he
Mm.
kind of nailed it. Like, that's really what it is.
Yes, yes, no, I agree. I think he's definitely onto something. And, I wrote something not too long ago about the fact that we do live in a time where we actually have the luxury of thinking about our emotions and feelings and
Mhm.
working through things. And I do find that, we have pendulum swings, I think, in society. And we are at this point where emotions are high and people can share their emotions in a nanosecond. And it's like across the entire world. So we've got
Mhm.
this ability to magnify things in a way that we've never had an ability to do to before, where, if you wanted to learn about something that happened in another country, you had to wait for the article to come out or happen to be able to watch the show
Mhm.
at the time that it was. But now we don't have those buffers in place. We don't have the time that separates the event from the reporting of the event. And so people's nervous systems are in overdrive. And if you don't
Yeah.
know how to regulate yourself, or you don't have
Mhm.
a team of people that you can depend on that can help you regulate, but instead actually egg you on and make you even more upset or more overwhelmed, then we find ourselves in a society where things are a bit chaotic.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I do feel like what the importance of these conversations is to also to teach, to not necessarily teach, but to talk about it so that people recognize how powerful they can be if they were learning how to harness this information and apply it to their lives. They would go from being, I feel like, overwhelmed and powered over to empowered. Now they would be like,
Absolutely.
okay, I don't have to allow this election to ruin my life. I don't have to allow
Right.
this person who said something to make me feel like I need to go on a rampage. It's more of that internal locus of control versus everything on the external stirring you up.
Mhm. And it starts, like you mentioned earlier, with your daughter being 5 and saying, "Hey, this doesn't feel right."
Mm,
That's teaching her, right, that we have some, we can manage this, and
yes.
this is how we do it.
Yep.
But when you just have to push through things over and over, yeah, you definitely develop that sense of, "I don't have any control." I think I posted about it maybe last week about teaching kids that the world is a hard place doesn't really make them more resilient. It really teaches them that you don't have any control over it. This is how it
Mm,
is. And
mhm.
it's very, very disempowering. It's so much healthier, I think, to point out all the good that is in the world and let that be the foundation that they stem from and grow from, because it empowers them to know, like, hey, I can kind of create the world I want to live in, or at least surround myself with the kind of people that help me to thrive.
Yes. Yes. No, I'm so glad you brought that up too, because you're right. There's so much in our faces that tell us that the world is ending.
Yep.
But when you
Mhm.
really stop to think and if you walk through your own personal day out in the world, I mean, think about the fact that you can drive on a road where people abide by the rules of the road. Think about the fact that you go into a store and people greet you and say hello, and, if somebody helps you to your car. And those are the things that I think we
Mm,
forget about and focus so
absolutely.
much on all the noise that's happening. It's like, being able to set your aim differently again, and
Mhm.
reset, so that you don't get so swept up in
Yeah.
in the wildness that that is our
Yeah,
world sometimes.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we've talked about a lot, and I wish that I could bullet point it, but I cannot recall it in order. So, are there anything else you feel like maybe we missed, or something else that you want to be sure we touch on in relation to attachment and teenage relationships and being in alignment with our kids and our values?
Yeah, we did. We touched on so much, but I would just say, in terms of attachment and teens, again, is just slowing down, trusting yourself, trusting them, and really get curious and ask questions. Give them this space to where they know and completely feel. I mean, our words, we can say I trust you, but they feel it if we don't really
Mhm.
trust them. So it's so important for us to get clear with our own emotions, right? And so that
Yeah.
we can provide this safe space for teens. It's just huge.
Yeah. Well, how can people find you, Anne?
Well, so I'm online now. So at Inner Parent Coaching is where you can find me online. So for people who do not live here in Oregon, and I really developed my online page because I am just called to advocate for children and parents and just reach a wider audience. So right now I'm providing some one-to-one coaching and some group coaching, but I, would love it if people reach out and ask questions, but you can find me on Instagram and Facebook at Inner Parent Coaching. And I'm really focusing on unschooling and partnership parenting and helping parents who want to learn more about how to connect with their kids and in a different way and lead more soul aligned lives.
Thank you for listening. This is the final episode of 2022 and wraps up the podcast for the year. And what a year it has been. I've met some incredible people and have enjoyed bringing their stories, their insights, and the work they are doing to positively impact the world to you. The calendar is already filling up for 2023. I'll be talking to entrepreneurs, studio creators, therapists, energy workers, and more parents living and learning alongside of their children. I cannot wait. Merry Christmas, happy holidays, and cheers to a wonderful new year. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.